What's up, everyone? This is Ray DeLucci with the Repertoire Report. Welcome back to another week of the show. Justin is out this week. He is traveling. I'm sure you will be excited to hear where he's been when he visits us in the next podcast. Going to be a longer episode for sure, so feel free to tune in next week as well because I think Justin's going to have a lot to share. But yes, we're here back at the Repertoire Report. Very excited. A lot of news to cover, a lot of things going on. But I really just wanted to first take the time to say thank you to everyone who's joined in so far, who's listened, who's helped get the show back out there. You know, Justin and I had conversations in the beginning of the year on basically partnering up and putting out content together. And I really think that we're both super excited for, at least I can speak to myself and Justin will share the same, but we're both super excited for this future because, you know, I personally think there's a giant gap from restaurant working people to people elsewhere in the food industry. You know, when I left restaurants and went to the other aspects of the food industry during COVID, I felt that there was a big gap in regards to information. It felt like people inside the restaurant world knew X, Y, and Z, and you know, it makes sense. You have a very demanding job, you have a lot of stuff going on, but people in the restaurant industry knew X, Y, Z, and then people outside of the restaurant industry were privy to other broader themes and key industry information that I think is very useful to people in the restaurant industry. And that information just never got transferred over. So the goal of this podcast is to really bridge the gap between restaurant folk and outside of restaurant folk in the food industry. And obviously it can pertain to anyone outside of the food world, but really giving a comprehensive look into the food industry as a whole that can be utilized in and outside of the restaurants if you are a culinary professional. So that being said, if you have found this podcast useful, please subscribe to our YouTube channel, like this video, share it with your friends, share it with colleagues, and if you're listening on audio, obviously, subscribe to our podcast, follow our podcast, and again, share it if possible. That being said, let's get into the show. First up is something I found interesting, and this is a National Restaurant Association research and media report. If you've never been on the National Restaurant Association website, I highly recommend it. You know, last week, Justin and I were talking about this idea that the NRA had put out a report that if restaurants hadn't increased their prices by at least 30% since 2019, they would not be maintaining a 5% profit margin. I've seen that used in so many different articles this week. And it's simply because they are the source of truth for restaurant news and restaurant dynamics. And it is something that I think is super important to be aware of. So if you've never been on National Restaurant Association's website, please do that. And I really look into the research and media section, specifically the economic indicators. If you're a restaurant owner, if you manage restaurants, or if you're just someone who's interested in where the food industry is heading in the restaurant sector, that's the place to go. But they have a post that they put up May 21st, 2025 that claims restaurants projected to add 490,000 seasonal jobs this summer. An uptick in the restaurant industry's prime labor pool will likely support hiring for the summer season. And let me get into why. So summer is the busiest season for restaurants in many parts of the country. A stronger business leads to additional employment opportunities at all levels of a restaurant operation. These summer jobs are typically filled by a wide variety of individuals: teenagers, college students, teachers, even retirees who want to pick up a few shifts at the 19th hole of their local golf course. So restaurants are expected to add, according to the National Restaurant Association, 490,000 seasonal jobs this summer. And according to the National Restaurant Association's 27th annual Eating and Drinking Place Summer Employment Forecast. So this would be a jump from last summer when 459,000 seasonal jobs were added. And this stronger hiring is largely because teens and young adults, that's the cohort most likely to work seasonal jobs, are returning to the labor force in numbers not seen in years. So at the same time, restaurant operators remain uncertain about business conditions in the months ahead, which may curtail their willingness to expand payrolls in a challenging environment. As a result, summer hiring expected to remain below 500,000 for the second consecutive year. They have a graph here where in 2015, 2016, and 2017, hiring in the summer for restaurants was above 500,000 for jobs added at eating and drinking places. And in 2018, 2019, it started to dip. And then 2020 to 2022, there was no data. But then 2023, it stormed back, 524,000 jobs added. And then last year, it was 459. And then again, an uptick this year to 490,000. So in their report, they project that northeastern states will see the strongest summer job growth. So this is due to Maine seeing their employment increasing at a projected 32%, Alaska at 22%, Delaware at 17%, Rhode Island at 17%, and then New Jersey at 12%, and Massachusetts at 12% as well. This is for employment increased projections. And the states projected to add the most eating and drinking place jobs during the season are New York, California, New Jersey, Massachusetts, Texas, Illinois, Michigan, and Ohio. And you will see on the flip side, states like Florida, Arizona, and Louisiana, they are to register declines in eating and drinking place employment during this 2025 summer season, as obviously other places actually have summer, whereas Florida's always warm, so they're not as strongly impacted by this type of hiring. So what does this all mean? I think that the most interesting part of this report is this section where it says the prime labor pool is getting deeper. So as the 2025 summer season approached, the restaurant industry's prime labor pool was at its highest level in several years. More than 6.2 million 16 to 19-year-olds were in the labor force in April. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, this was 900,000 people higher than the comparable pre-pandemic level in April of 2019. It represented the highest April reading since 2008, which was 6.5 million. That number will rise well above 7 million during the peak summer months when more students are available, but the early workforce arrival of many teens likely helped some restaurants get a jump on their summer hiring. The recent upward trend of teens in the workforce is a positive sign for restaurants. This cohort makes up 20% of the industry workforce. Overall, restaurants are the economy's largest employer of teenagers, providing job opportunities for 1.9 million 16 to 19-year-olds, or 33% of all working teens. They are also an important component of the restaurant workforce, with 20 to 24-year-olds accounting for 21% of all employees. Restaurants have started ramping up their summer hiring in April, and more of them to choose from than they had in decades. Quite stark numbers, and it just goes to show you the fact that people entering the restaurant industry enter really young. And when it comes to the state of our industry, the career opportunities, what's available to them, how they're treated, what the dynamics of a restaurant are, all these things are highly critical because, as you just saw, 1/3 of all teen employment is in restaurants. So as important as ever, talking to people about restaurants, the conditions, the pay, what's going on in this industry, it's all critical and crucial because the next generations, many of their first jobs will be in a restaurant or hospitality setting, and they should be set up to be starting on the right foot. And that means better restaurant jobs, healthier restaurant jobs, and jobs that are fair and equitable to them. So some notes to finalize this with the National Restaurant Association. Some notes that they share about this forecast is that eating and drinking places are the primary component of the restaurant and food service industry, which the National Restaurant Industry defines, that which encompasses all meals and snacks prepared away from home. And then another key point is summer employment is defined between June, July, and August. And generally, the U.S. restaurant industry begins to ramp up its summer seasonal hiring in April, and it peaks in June, July, and August. So that being said, I think it's very interesting. And I think it's just a call to the fact that, I've had this in my mind when COVID hit, this idea that a lot of people are leaving the restaurant industry. A lot of people are going elsewhere for work. That may be true in a sense, but young people, young adults, teens, they're going to restaurants because it still is one of the most accessible and easy ways to start making an income, whether it's pre-college or post-college. So this idea of restaurant work going away isn't true. I do think it is true that the more experienced and skilled laborers, I don't even say skilled, but people who have more experience, in their 30s or 40s may be leaving. And I would love to, maybe that's the next topic we break down or do a deep dive on. Sorry if I'm sniffling. My allergies are at an all-time worst right now. But it is important to get conditions right for people entering the restaurant industry so that they can expand upon that career, or if they're only working there for other purposes, that they have a good experience and that they feel like it is an industry at least worth fighting for. Because as these numbers grow, if this is an industry that is intolerant, if it's an industry that is abusive, if this is an industry that is not good to work in, we will see negative effects. I mean, we've already seen that during COVID, the mass exodus, the lockdowns, everything in between. I feel like there's a tipping point for restaurants right now where costs are up, raising menu prices is extremely difficult. Economic indicators are worrisome. Getting your employment right, I think, is key in the next few years to whether your business will succeed or fail, because you don't want to take on the extremely high cost of increased turnover, and you don't want to take on the cost of training people if you have solid people from the beginning. So that's my thoughts on this new National Restaurant Association report. So some interesting food news. This whole idea of buy now, pay later for fast food. So the news from CNN comes out on March 21st as well, that DoorDash will let users buy now, pay later for fast food, a possible worrying sign for the economy. So CNN shares these buy now, pay later services are typically used on large purchases like furniture, but now one service is branching out into fast food. So this is the idea that DoorDash partnered with Klarna. And when the option launches, DoorDash users can use Klarna to pay in 4 interest-free payments. This has obviously been something we've been aware of, but one thing that's interesting is on May 19th from payments.com is that Klarna marks 100 million customers as losses nearly double. So Klarna is growing rapidly, but losses are doubling. Klarna logged a $92 million pre-tax loss for the first quarter, up from $47 million a year ago. The company cites issues such as share-based payments expenses, severance-related restructuring costs, and expenses connected to its initial public offering, which is now on hold. There is a thought, though, that a lot of people are just simply not paying for these lower expenses. And it's really interesting to see because this idea of the buy now, pay later, it's something where experts are people are kind of projecting it's going to cause a lot of pain for the everyday consumer, and it's a worrying sign for the economy. So if you look at what CNN was reporting, so they share for CNN Business, they share that Americans have found themselves in more and more debt recently. In the fourth quarter of last year, overall debt levels increased by 0.5% to $18.04 trillion. So that report also found that the share of households becoming seriously delinquent and missed payment for 90 plus days, their auto loans and credit cards is at 14-year highs. So this partnership is being scrutinized because as this expands its offering, there's a worry that people will be, more and more delinquent on these smaller purchases, which they, make during times of economic crisis, or they just make and forget to pay. And basically, there's this concern that consumers will become delinquent on these smaller purchases for food, which will then destroy their credit, will destroy their financial stability, or at least their financial standing, and it can be harmful. So it's something to just to pay attention to, because there is so many reports coming out of people not paying back. Another thing that I find interesting in this is that there's a lot of talk that that there's a lot of unregulation or deregulation with Klarna, and that there's going to be a lot of regulation coming if this proves to be pretty catastrophic to the end consumer. Morning Brew shared that the Swedish fintech company Klarna, which allows shoppers to pay for their burritos and other items in installments, said this week that its consumer credit losses shot up $136 million. That's 17% higher than in Q1 of 2024. Americans and this news comes as more folks rely on it. Klarna's comparable revenue rose by 15% in Q1, and its consumer base swelled to over 100 million people. It shared that a quarter of users are borrowing to pay for groceries, compared to just 14% a year ago. The same survey that found that 41% of borrowers struggle to repay loans on time, and this is a 34% increase from last year. Klarna says that it's not alarmed by the rise in unpaid balances and that they're still very low, which is interesting. So think about it this way. People are using these buy now, pay later schemes or companies for restaurant purchases and grocery purchases. Worrying sign for the economy, a worrying sign of the state of personal finance for many, many, many Americans, and just a scary time for many people. And the fact that simple necessities such as food, they need to basically take on a loan to pay for it. It is a tremendous example of just the fragility that many people face with our economic security. And there is worry that Klarna will be making a profit off of this economic instability due to missed payments and whatnot. Very interesting. I bring it up. It might not be the most interesting for everyone, but for me, it's interesting because this is going to be something that I think is going to see a lot of depends on the initiatives, but could see a lot of government scrutiny in the coming years, and it obviously will affect restaurants. Just something to keep an eye on. All right, so the next story is this article I read by Bloomberg, which I found very fascinating. It was published on May 27th at 6 a.m. And it says, "The test kitchens helping restaurants navigate the trade war." This article tracks Sysco, the largest U.S. food supplier, is using a group of culinary experts to help customers brainstorm ways to blunt the impact of Trump's tariffs. So I found this article. I'll share the link, obviously, with everything else in the show notes, but I found it interesting. So basically the idea is that based out of downtown Chicago, these chefs are cooking for Sysco. Basically, these chefs are coaching eateries on substitutes for imported ingredients hit by President Donald Trump's tariffs. So thinking of, in the article, they share Gouda cheese coming from Wisconsin and not Europe, fish coming from the Great Lakes instead of Asia. And so basically this idea is that this team of chefs within Sysco is basically operating on this idea of coaching restaurants coaching restaurant managers, chefs, domestic food businesses on using domestic products in place of imported products to help cover or to not feel the effects of the tariffs from the Trump administration. So just an idea of Sysco, if you're not aware, they are an industry giant and uniquely situated to influence menus. It supplies food to 400,000 establishments in the U.S., where it generates more than 70% of its roughly $80 billion in annual revenue. Customers like Wendy's and Chipotle, they run more than 70 test kitchens in the U.S., and the restaurant industry largely sources from the U.S., but some key ingredients are imported. And so in the Bloomberg article, they share that the U.S. relies on Mexican avocados and tomatoes. Almost all bananas come from countries like Guatemala and Ecuador. 75% of seafood is imported. 75% of seafood is imported. That's not even enough U.S. beef to meet all the demand that we have in the United States. We import a lot of beef. We cannot meet our own demands. And total agricultural imports topped $200 billion last year. So Bloomberg goes on to share that these tariffs, which are set to drastically rise in July when a 90-day pause expires, have prompted U.S. restaurants to look for help finding ingredient substitutes. More than 40% of eateries surveyed by Researcher Technomic have already shifted some sourcing to the U.S. or countries with cheaper prices. So minimizing the impact of the trade war has become a crucial move as profits come under increasing pressure. They then sort the story of the 30% price increase that we shared last week on the podcast. If we look at this graph they share, which I find interesting, it's America's reliance on food imports. So the value of U.S. imports in 2024, just to give a perspective. And I've had some comments on the tariff situation. They're going to affect it. They're not going to affect it. But for people that doubt that this is something that will affect restaurants, if you've ever worked in a restaurant, you know that not everything is made domestically. And the argument for, just buy American doesn't work in restaurants because that has never been the case for how we serve food, serve customers, and frankly, put on a great dinner for guests that are paying for a high quality experience. You think of seafood products, $25.6 billion come from outside the U.S. in imports. That was the 2024 number. Baked goods, cereals, pasta, $14.9 billion. Processed fruit and vegetables, $13.6 billion. Fresh vegetables, $13.4 billion. Beef and beef products, $11.7 billion. Coffee, $6.6 billion. And the list goes on. And these are numbers from the U.S. Department of Agriculture. When you work at a restaurant, the Buy American thing doesn't work because while we have great producers, great farmers, great winemakers, cheesemakers, some things are meant to be imported because of their quality. We look at French wine. We look at Italian cheese. We look at the many, many different things that come from across the sea that it's not like, and it's not for restaurants, it's not this is more so a cheaper option. It's literally because it's from France, because it's from Spain, because it's from Italy, because these items are made in a key area that have a key terroir, a key flavor profile, and a key reason for being sought out. So I've talked to people outside the restaurant industry about the tariffs, and it's always, buy American, but that doesn't work in restaurants because it's never meant to be just, it's all from America. And of course there's restaurants like that, but if you go to an Italian restaurant, what are you expecting? Italian wine, Italian products. If you go to a French restaurant, the same thing. And while you can replicate those in America in some cases, there are key things you can't get, or there's some things that you would want to import just due to the fact that the artisanal product is made in that country you're trying to serve food from. So that argument doesn't work. But they go on to say that in Chicago, these two chefs, Freeman and Jeff Cresswell, Sysco's director of business specialists, are clad in black chef's coats. They've whipped up a charcuterie board featuring Wisconsin Gouda made by a Dutch immigrant, duck raised in Indiana, and camembert aged near New York's Finger Lakes. And so basically the idea for these two chefs, Gabriel Freeman and Jeff Cresswell, is that they are preparing dishes with American products and showing them and helping sell them to consumers throughout the country. In this picture, they share that they range from selling Wisconsin trout to Chicago-made chorizo. And this is really awesome. And I'm not, for my previous rant, I'm not knocking buying American products like this. American producers are underrepresented. They're undervalued, and obviously they don't get the respect they deserve. In-house charcuterie, the United States, different cheeses, different truffles from around the United States. There's a lot of great products that come from our country that aren't exposed to on the dining scene. This could be obviously a positive for them. And so having chefs do this work of sharing what American producers make is really cool to see. While it is a negative for those restaurants that want to import these key things and can't, or will have a large financial penalty for doing so, the upside to it is there are these American producers being given a lot more attention and finally getting their due for the products they're serving. So the Bloomberg article shares that many of the products Friedman and Cresswell showcased are available through the company's homegrown program, which includes a network of about 30 suppliers within 300 miles of the Chicagoland area. The initiative started around 2019 as Eat Local movements gained momentum, and at the time, Trump's first trade war was also upending food procurement. So this has been many years in the making. So if you look at Sysco, they've been pushing to find more domestic suppliers across their business, and they now say that less than 10% of their goods are imported. And based on this, a spokesperson says that we see the strategic benefit in bringing supply chains closer to home because you reduce exposure to disruption. And so basically, if you keep going after this article, they'll say that the tariffs are going to basically even the playing field. They talked to Joe DeFrancesco. He's a farmer who grows tomatoes in his Connecticut farm. And so basically, they share that produce from Mexico had tended to be about 25% cheaper than U.S. options, according to DeFrancesco. But with the U.S. planning to impose a 21% duty on Mexican tomatoes in July, he expects demand to rise for his crop. So you do see positives for local producers and how they can sell to companies like Sysco, and how these local producers that might cost more are going to, obviously make out, which is great, which is a good thing for our farmers here in America. But the key thing that I feel like is missing is that, this evens the playing field for where to buy your tomatoes, but the cost still goes up for the restaurant. And consumers are not ready to take the increase in prices. So that's the biggest worry. The worry isn't that, American producers are going to necessarily suffer. A lot of them will actually do pretty well and thrive under this. And I love the idea of highlighting key producers in America in terms of what they make, what they offer, their artisanal products, their craft. It's awesome. But the issue is that consumers are not in a place to take on these costs, or they don't have the appetite to do so, or at least that remains to be seen. A lot of the reporting we've done, or the monitoring we've done over the last month, shows that consumers do not want raised costs on food. They don't see the value in it, but this will raise costs. But that being said, it's great for these local producers. This idea of made in the USA, the National Restaurant Association show in Chicago showed that a lot of producers are saying made in the USA, basically their products aren't affected by tariffs, and a lot of recognition of actually building manufacturing in different opportunities to create these products inside of the United States is coming to a lot of different regions. So I think it's interesting. It's really a great read. It's the idea that, yes, as a food industry, we are global. We rely on a lot of different producers outside of the USA. At the same token, it is great to highlight regional producers in your own area or across the United States that are also doing great products that don't get the demand because maybe their chorizo is made in the Chicago area and it's not made in Spain. It's like, well, is there no worth in trying the Chicagoland chorizo? Of course there is. And of course we would love to promote it if it's a great product and eat it and celebrate it. And I think this could have a big impact in how chefs in the United States cook, how they view sourcing, and how they represent other countries. If it is not financially feasible to import these different artisanal products or key products for cuisines from Europe and other countries like that, how does that change the cuisine for restaurants going into the next decade? How does that change menus, menu architecture, how we think about food, what consumers hold up as valuable? Because if they don't have access to these key things, or these items become overpriced and the value doesn't meet what they're paying, then is there a drive for more American artisanal products that supplement these European imports into restaurants? So a lot to be said, a lot to be seen, positives and negatives, trying to be middle of the issue. My biggest worry, though, is the price customers will face and likely not want to pay because of all of this. So a lot to be seen. Quick update. McDonald's is closing its Cosmics restaurants. If you weren't aware, last year they had opened these beverage-only restaurants called Cosmics. It was based on like an 80s cartoon character or marketing character they had. Basically, they were trying to get into the beverage-only restaurant space, and basically that a lot of they shared that these locations were test locations, and that a lot of the drinks from Cosmics will be tested at their McDonald's locations. But basically, a report from New York NBC shares that McDonald's has said Friday that it's closing down Cosmics, a new restaurant format it began piloting in the U.S. last year. So basically, the chairman of McDonald's and CEO Chris Kempczinski had said at the time that this is a $100 billion category that's growing faster than the rest of casual dining and with superior margins. It's a space that we believe we have the right to win in. And I think he correctly guessed this. I think that they correctly analyzed that A, the beverage category is growing like crazy, and B, the margins obviously on a coffee shop are much better than a full-service restaurant or even a fine dining restaurant, and let's go after it. But Kamsinski said Cosmic's drinks might be too complex to fit in with regular McDonald's store operations, and so they opened up a location near its headquarters in Chicago and 7 in Texas, but the McDonald's company plans to shut them all down by June. A lot more reporting that needs to be done on this as to why. I think we'll see this in quarterly reports on why Cosmic's closed, but I do think it was interesting that a brand as big as McDonald's went at it with these high sugar coffee drinks, this idea of opening up a new brand, and it just didn't work. And it's surprising to me because the beverage industry is one that is growing rapidly. It's one that has great margins. That, anecdotally, I go by these drive-through coffee places like Scooters or 7 Brew, and they're always packed. They're always busy. So what did McDonald's not get right with their beverage offerings? Interesting to hear and see why, but just a quick update. Another quick update, this is coming from Food Dive, talking about U.S. manufacturing. Kraft Heinz confirms $3 billion investment in U.S. manufacturing. The ketchup maker is aiming to offset the impact of tariffs and weak consumer spending. Food Dive reports Kraft Heinz will spend $3 billion in its U.S. manufacturing facilities. The company confirmed to Food Dive the largest investment in its plants in decades. So the president of Kraft Heinz North America operations told Reuters last week that planned investments could add 3,500 employees to the Lunchables producers' workforce. Part of Kraft Heinz's investment includes a $400 million distribution center in DeKalb, Illinois, that is set to create 60 jobs, a transaction that was first announced in 2023. Reuters was first to report the manufacturing investment, and Kraft Heinz confirmed the news but declined to provide further details to Food Dive. Food Dive goes on to share, as President Donald Trump threatened sweeping tariffs on imports, the spending on Kraft Heinz's U.S. factories could help it offset the impact of trade uncertainty. Tariffs factored into the company's decision to make the investment. So the majority of the company's products sold are made domestically. Notably, the company's Maxwell House coffee brand faces tariffs on imported coffee beans, as do most every coffee maker, because coffee is imported into America, which is going to be something that is looked into in the beverage category. So beyond this, the company is also expanding its portfolio, announcing the launch of Lunchables with PB&J, aiming to cut into the market share of J.M. Smucker's nearly billion-dollar brand Uncrustables. And Kraft Heinz said earlier this week it'll explore potential strategic transactions in order to drive profitable growth and value creation. So just an idea that Kraft Heinz is planning to have $3 billion invested in the U.S. in manufacturing in order to help offset tariffs. Obviously, still a lot at play in that. But the idea that they had announced this and then they are continuing through it shows that companies such as Kraft Heinz, as big as they are worried about the cost of tariffs, or at least the cost of being exposed in the international market. So finding ways to reduce that exposure and obviously bringing U.S. Which it is important to note, they did have these plans in 2023 to be able to continue to do that. They had plans in 2023 for the distribution center, so some of this was already planned, but the idea to keep increasing within the U.S. is important to note for anyone interested in the broader food industry economy. Another Food Dive article I found interesting was Food Industry Fights for SNAP as Program Faces Massive Cuts. The benefits program accounts for around 5% of all grocery purchases, according to FMI. So again, Food Dive, one of my favorite websites, building off of the SNAP conversation Justin and I had last week. So I did get some comments on people, maybe not agreeing with the idea that cutting SNAP is as important as I believe it. I believe it should not be cut at all. And obviously I have my views on it. I did receive some commentary of, obviously disagreement, which is expected. But what I don't think many people understand is that it's not just a cut to food. It's also the effects of what cutting that food for people, especially kids, what that looks like for restaurants and grocery stores. So basically, last week, the House Agricultural Committee advanced legislation that would cut as much as $300 billion in nutrition spending, as well as overhaul SNAP by requiring states to help fund the program's benefits, Politico reported. And on Sunday, the House Budget Committee passed a tax cut bill, clearing the way for a House floor vote, which could happen this week, Reuters reported. And this, again, was shared on May 21st for everyone who was not aware. The proposed cuts come as states also look to restrict SNAP purchase of candy and soda. Basically, as of February, more than 42 million people participate in SNAP up 2% from the same time last year, and SNAP accounts for around 5% of all supermarket purchases. SNAP is very well received across the political spectrum. Jennifer Hatcher, FMI's chief public policy officer, shares, and 59% of people are opposed to cutting or reducing SNAP funding, while one-third are in favor. The proposed changes come at a time when consumers continue to worry about their grocery spending and how trade policies could potentially increase the cost of goods, including food. The National Grocers Association said it is deeply concerned by the cuts in programmatic cost shift changes in the proposed legislation. And NGA President and CEO Greg Ferrara says that SNAP is not only essential in fighting food insecurity, but it is also a proven economic engine for thousands of local communities across the country. Earlier in May, the NGA said it met with representatives of 4 Democratic members of Congress to urge Congress to limit SNAP funding cuts. And they say that we urge Congress to pursue balanced reforms and solutions that strengthen the program, eliminate waste and fraud, and uphold the health and economic well-being of American families while preserving American jobs in our food chain and grocery industry. So by a 57% to 39% margin, survey respondents won a single national standard on what SNAP can be used for, according to FMI, which I think is a part of the legislation that it seems like people agree on. Like, yeah, let's create the standards for it. But approximately 25 of the states this year have considered restricting SNAP participants from buying specific items like candy and soda, and those state policy changes would require getting a waiver from the USDA. While Nebraska was the first to receive approval, Arkansas, Indiana, and Iowa have also submitted waiver requests regarding the idea of restricting certain items being purchased on SNAP. FMI has pushed back on efforts to limit how SNAP participants use their benefits, noting that the best results are those that make resources available, like dietitian-supported recipes or curated shopping experiences. And FMI has said that different state policies could confuse shoppers and retailers. And to conclude, FMI President and CEO Leslie G. Saracen says the future strength of this program isn't just a policy issue, it's a moral imperative and an economic necessity. So I am obviously a big supporter of SNAP. I think that, you look at the stats from just No Kid Hungry alone, the amount of kids that face childhood hunger in our country, the amount of kids funded, their food being funded through SNAP, and the opportunities they have to eat simply by being in SNAP is important. And it's noteworthy, and it's, crucial to their health and their well-being. But beyond that, if you, for some reason, don't, perceive that as something that should be like that important, or if you perceive it in a way that, okay, that you want tighter restrictions on this stuff, there's also the very real economic issue that if SNAP is cut, up to 5% of grocery sales goes away. Those are jobs. That's just local economies being hurt, and it just doesn't help. It doesn't help really anyone in the food industry do better. And Eater shared an article that cutting food stamps isn't just cruel, it's also a bad economic policy. And they share in here that when the economy is bad, SNAP dollars are immediately infused back into the system. And they cite their sources in the article, which you can check out. But they share that this results in $1.50 in GDP growth for every dollar spent. So for every dollar spent in SNAP when the economy is bad, $1.50 in GDP growth is created because these programs become super crucial. SNAP spending also creates jobs, lowers healthcare costs, improves academic outcomes for children, and generally reduces poverty. So, that being said, it's just very important. This last paragraph I'll share on this before we go to the next story from Eater is that conversely, and this is written by Amy McCarthy, so great work to them. Every time there are cuts to SNAP, the economy suffers. Farmers and grocers lose money. Supermarket workers get laid off, and state and local budgets get strapped as local officials try to meet the demand for food assistance. If the cuts that just passed the House become law, projections indicate, and this is off the vote that just happened this weekend, projections indicate that they could be catastrophic. One estimate suggests 1 million jobs will be lost, and states will see $113 billion in GDP losses. And this is according to Amy Klobuchar, who is the chair of the Senate Committee on Agricultural Nutrition and Forestry. Farmers will see billions lost in revenue, and workers in industries from trucking to supermarkets will lose their jobs. The president of Indiana's Gleaners Food Bank described the impact of the proposed cuts as a needless, self-inflicted humanitarian and economic disaster for Indiana and the country. This is something that's being voted on right now. So again, I share the No Kid Hungry doc alone for how this helps fight childhood hunger in the United States. I'll share that in the link in the notes. It's a crucial piece of legislation, and even if you're opposed to it, it will be affecting the food industry's economy, local economies, availability in different regions. It does affect more than just the kids that are hungry. Well, that I believe should be enough for this to stay a lot more is affected when you cut benefits for food, especially in harsh economic times. So just something to consider. For me, food insecurity is something, that is crucial to be fighting against as a chef, as someone in the food world. So it's just something I wanted to share as this stuff gets closer to being decided upon. With that is my final story for the day. Do want to say that I hope everyone had a reflective Memorial Day. A thank you to those who have served and died protecting our country. Obviously, it'd be a lot different without those people, without those who gave the ultimate sacrifice to protect and serve. So thank you to them. And I just hope that in the next few weeks, there is a lot of growth for you all. The summer month is coming, so if you're in restaurants, things get busier. So I hope that not only is there growth, but there's time to relax, there's time to find balance, time to unwind, even if it's less into the summer months. And in general, the food industry is a crazy, fun, entertaining, exciting, and thrilling place. A lot is going on. So I implore you always, if it is not this show, elsewhere, to stay connected, stay informed, and to understand how a decision in grocery stores affects restaurants, how a decision on imports affects local producers in positive ways, as we've seen, but how that might affect restaurants in negative ways. And to be aware that the next generation of chefs, of cooks coming up into the restaurant industry is coming. It will be coming. Restaurants continue to be a prime source of employment. And we as an industry, those in it, many of you listening, those outside of it, myself, have the responsibility to at least try to make it better in many ways, or make employment options in the food industry better in many ways. So thank you all for listening to the show. Thank you for listening to Repertoire Report. Don't forget to subscribe, like, share. Next week, Justin's back. We will have a longer podcast. I told him I wanted an hour and a half. We'll see if we go longer, shorter, but it's going to be longer because Justin is on a very exciting trip, which I will let him detail in the next podcast. I will be kind of taking a seat and listening and asking key questions. But yeah, very excited for that. And again, thank you all for the support, and we'll see you on the next Repertoire Report.